Digital banking fraud has increased by 33%. That's according to the South African Banking Risk Information Centre's annual crime stats for 2020. Sabric released the results yesterday. Connect Group CEO Steven Heilbron joins us now to discuss this further. Steven, thanks for your time. So people obviously went online to shop and bank during the start of the lockdown, and it seems so did criminals, but they were out there to steal. What are you finding?
Hi, Shahan. Good evening to you. Good evening to your viewers. There's no question that if you look at the stats that have just been released from Sabric, that the debit card, credit card, digital fraud has become significant. Today, consumers have a choice, and the reality is, the old message that cash carries a high risk and a high cost has now more than been equaled by the fact that the digital world, debit, credit card, also carries a high cost and a risk. But let me say both mechanisms, cash and digital, are critical and an essential choice for consumers.
Yeah, so obviously, people try as much as possible to protect themselves. Banks also try to protect people with different measures in place. I know you have to wait for a notification to accept for some banks when you make an online transaction. Does that mean that those are not working and not deterring these cyber criminals?
No, I think on the contrary, these things do work well. But maybe let me just give you some context, Shahan. At Connect and Kazang, we're a fintech company. Our entire focus is on the retail environment and on enabling retailers and giving them choice. So our retailers have consumers in their stores every day. And whether it's cash, if they're taking cash, we put the bank in their store. And if they're taking credit card or debit card transactions, we acquire those transactions. I think what's absolutely critical is that we give retailers a choice. Now, the consumer as well has choice. And whether the consumer pays with cash or with a debit card or credit card, that is the democracy of payment. Now, how a consumer conducts themselves, whether they're paying in cash or whether they're paying with a debit card, is a responsibility that the consumer needs to take on themselves, which is, there's a responsible way to actually conduct a digital transaction and a cash transaction. So many of these mechanisms are effective and do work, and they are clearly there is some degree of vulnerability, but the consumers themselves need to be very responsible about the way in which they practice these payment mechanisms.
Yeah. So how do people actually protect themselves? Because you mentioned that there are measures in place to actually make sure that it's not easy for a cyber criminal to actually get your details and try to steal money. Is there anything else that I can do as an individual, perhaps, to make sure this doesn't happen?
Yeah. So again, as a consumer, it's essential that you have the choice. And then again, as I said, Shahan, from a cash perspective, where you draw cash, where you keep cash, how visible you are is an issue. And from a digital perspective, there are very clear guidelines around how you protect your passwords, your piece of plastic, your payment mechanisms, and your facilitation. So if you adhere to these standards and you're socially aware, because there are a lot of people that are out there to try and capture ID fraud, then I think you stand a fairly good chance of defending yourself. But whether you're paying with cash or whether you're paying with a card or digitally, there are many mechanisms which you as a consumer can use to limit your risk. And then, of course, as a digital provider, which is what we are, as well as a cash provider, we have a lot of safety mechanisms in the back end. But there's no question, the old adage that cash was dangerous and expensive, I think what we're seeing now is that debit card fraud and credit card fraud or digital fraud is now today a multiple of that cost and risk. But the choice of a consumer isn't really determined necessarily by that, but rather by the choice of payment.
Yeah. I was listening to an interview on 702 when I was driving into the office, and there was a concern raised about phones being stolen and then people's passwords, etc., being stored on iClouds and criminals using that information to actually get into bank accounts and withdraw money and buy things online. Is there any way you can actually make sure that doesn't happen then? Because we trust our smartphones, don't we? We put our passwords up in the cloud, so it's easy and convenient for us when we make a purchase.
So Shahan, again, it's, you know, all of our phones are protected with a variety of different encryption mechanisms and passwords. But there's a very strong responsibility on us as consumers to protect that, not to leave not to make that information available to somebody to whom it shouldn't be available to, not to leave it on your desk when it's open and engaged. So when you are transacting in the digital world, you have a responsibility to protect your data. So one needs to be very aware. I think what we're seeing now is with the proliferation of online and digital, we are seeing a significant pickup in fraud, and this comes at quite a cost to the consumer and a risk. So, but I want to make the point that it's critical in a country like ours that consumers have an ability to pay with cash, and they have an ability to pay with a debit card, a credit card, or any digital mechanism. These are critical options for financial inclusion. And then there's a responsibility both on the providers as well as the consumer to follow the rules and to try and protect themselves in transacting.
All right, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Connect Group CEO Steven Heilbron.